All right. Hi, everybody. You are watching Simply SCAdian, no title required. This is Zoph, and I am thrilled tonight to have my co-host Lucas with me. He's been kind of busy the past few months, so it's lovely to see your face, Lucas.
Hi, it's so nice to be back, guys. I love that I get to kind of continue to do this, though, despite the fact of having a busy life. Hi, guys. Welcome to Simply Scadian, no title required. As always, our mission is to bring you folks from throughout the SCA, from throughout the known world, who are who are very knowledgeable in just a myriad amount of areas. And maybe at this point, haven't achieved status yet, and that's fine. We're not looking for that here. We love our folks with that, but we're like those regular folks who are making and breaking it in the SCA, who are working towards maybe that goal, or maybe that's just not what they're into, but they just love the knowledge that they have in the SCA. So once again, as always, when I'm here, I'm going to remind you, please check out the Facebook page. Please check out the survey that's there. Fill it out. I guarantee you know somebody that we should talk to. We want to talk to people from all over. My challenge still stands. We've not done overseas yet. But we want, throughout the known world as much as we can get. And just we love, as our guest said tonight, just meeting new people. And it's pretty great. So make sure you fill that out and get that to us. And tonight we have I'm prepping on the fly, everybody. I must apologize. Alienor Hathaway, which I read as Anne Hathaway the first time I went through it, and I was like, that Shakespeare. So joined the society in the barony of Yarravettler in 2001 in Nordshield when it was still a Middle Kingdom principality. Moved to the east in the Shire of Panther Vale in 2011 in Nordshield. Her primary interest was the performing arts, yay, and poetry. That is also mine. Since moving to the East, she's become a dabbler in other projects. And aren't we all in the SCI? I feel like everyone should be dabbling. That's the goal. She still enjoys performing when she can, but also embroidery, weaving, baking. Lives with her husband Edward Talbot, and her son Roger. Primary delight in the current Middle Ages is delving into research of any type. Personal interests include and we're going to get to this stuff, guys. We're going to do this one. Book curses and undervalued people. I feel like there we go. Like that's an hour right there, isn't it? Um, she's researching the Cagots. Maybe I'm saying that wrong, and I'll be corrected later. A marginalized community in the Pyrenees in France and Spain. Is proud of always expanding resource on diversity, scholarship in the essay period, including, and I'm sure this is going to come up a lot, guys, LGBTQIA plus in period disability studies and diversity and ethnicity in Europe. Awesome. She has a wide breadth of interest in history and likely has a new fixation of the moment. She enjoys the company of her household, and we laughed about this one, so I apologize, folks. Soldes, you'll say it for me. You did
Miltonus, I
you'll
believe.
tone us. All right. Because they make up the entire cross section of the SCA interest. So I definitely want to hear about that. The household's values of mutual support and a quest for excellence hold true to her. She's apprenticed to Sir Tiberius Ilius Rufus, a mentor who is a member of Chivalry, Laurel, and Pelican, and therefore her household siblings are all involved in different aspects of the society. Eleanor, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's so great to have you on. So let's start out with the first question we always ask. How did you find the SCA?
So, funny enough, I found the SCA from the University of Wisconsin-Madison's Welcome Week information. They had the demonstration that the Barony of Yarravettler does right there in the Welcome Week. And my mother actually called me and said, honey, those are your people. You should go find them. So I went and like talked their ear off because I was so excited and so thrilled because I'd loved the Renaissance and Middle Ages. As you noted before, Lucas, I did name myself after Anne Hathaway. So I was already a history nerd because we'd gone to Shakespeare's birthplace and the Anne Hathaway cottage when I was 12. And that sort of started me on this journey of loving the Middle Ages and Renaissance. And I've loved them for that long. So finding the SCA was a perfect fit. My favorite thing about it was that the mentors I had while I was in school were of all different ages and all different backgrounds. So in college, I wasn't just stuck meeting 18-year-olds to 22-year-olds alone. I met people from who had been students themselves who could shepherd me along and support me.
Nice.
So what brought you from North Shield to the east?
A modern position. I actually mundanely work in the archive and information field, and there was a position in the state archives in Vermont. And so I ended up out here, and before I found anything, I found the SCA here.
So
And
what's the, go
sorry,
ahead.
yeah. No,
Nope.
and so I ended up finding the first event I could go to, and overlooking the mountain valleys here, and ended up finding that. So
I have a question. I don't know that we've ever really asked this before, but what did you find to be the biggest difference going from North Shield to eat, like changing kingdoms like that?
so I felt like having started in the Midwest and being a Midwesterner kind of by thing is a competition. The East is a lot bigger on competition than I was used to. I felt like competition was not a big thing where I started, like in North Shield. But the thing that I ended up finding too is there's passionate people about everything from both sides, so you end up finding them no matter what. But definitely the emphasis on kind of competition was what first took me aback a little bit.
Do you think competition is healthy, or like
What I've learned is it's healthy when it's a good balance, and I feel like the East has been making real strides toward display and competition so that there's something for everyone. I think that's been something that when I first moved here, I didn't get the opportunity to understand as much, but I feel I get it more now. And
Hmm.
but it really was it was much different. But the rest of it, the people who are passionate about the topic, they're in both in all the places.
So you started out as a performer. Was that something you did even in college?
I was a really drama queen from a very young age. I would
Well,
make my parents watch theater plays and sing Annie until the neighbors hated me. Um, I lived, so yes, I was doing, there was a Fool and Theater Guild that the Barony of Yarravettler had, and there was a bunch of young people who just wanted to perform. So we did Commedia dell'arte, we did zany, silly skits. I just wanted to perform. And my biggest thing is I don't really need to be the star. I just like to be in the show. And so that was a lot of what I enjoyed was playing Columbina, letting a little sass out, kind of the opportunities to do silly stories. Like we did sort of a commedia style improv of the wife of Bath's tale from the Canterbury Tales. And I got to play the enchantress who becomes the beautiful woman after the man gets his lesson. So I definitely, and then I just like the bardic arts. North Shield and the Mid Realm have an incredible community of bards, and so like I just did a lot of performing arts. Part of it was just a university campus that had a lot of that as an opportunity, and it was a much bigger campus. I mean, out here we don't have that much opportunity to perform the same.
hmm.
Yeah, in the east, unless you're like in Boston or some of the other really large cities, there's no theater happening because people are so far flung. It's not easy to get a group together.
And I mean, we try, and there are opportunities to perform, but I also have a young family, so it can be harder to do now. So I kind of expanded, especially just it's harder to travel with a young family and our position. So poetry became something that I focused more on as part of that as well. But I really find my own writing is based off of inspiration from others. So I really like to write um, I was doing a lot of editing myself too much, and so I got a lot of help learning how to change and not edit myself before I finish the work.
So who's that inspiration from? I mean, your bio said something that you pretty much live in the Middle Ages. So who are you emulating?
I
I was a medieval lit minor, a medieval lit major in college, so I probably know them. But
um so I really like the various sonnets. And so I read some of the Shakespeare sonnets, but there's also I there's a François Villon, who's a French, and I just love his ability to write poetry that was about the people. Because I mean, as much as the sonnets and the things that are wonderful and beautiful about the nobility is lovely, I really love the poetry of the people that Villon was able to get. I mean, they call him the vagabond. And I mean, yeah, it's in French, but I just love like his the just the language he uses, talking about like where the snows of yesteryear is the English translation, like où sont les neiges d'antan, like what happened to these incredible women of legend and history. And I mean, when he wrote things, it was, he was this rascal, he was this total rascal, but his poetry is just full of the people who were on the ground with him in the streets, and I find that absolutely fascinating.
So do you speak and read French?
I went to French immersion school as a child. I've lost some of my French, except when I've been under anesthesia, I've forgotten my English. So I still do speak enough French to understand it and use it for my work. Um, and I I think it helps me think different sometimes, is
hmm.
that language skill.
Yeah, I do German. So I dream in German sometimes.
I think I've lost all my Latin at this point.
Well,
I'm just
obviously, because you couldn't say her household name.
well, yeah.
I need to brush up my Latin, quite obviously.
I had 4 years of college of Latin, and then I was a tutor, and then just pretty much the day I walked out of the school, I never picked it up again, and just
Yeah.
I can read it a little bit and know what I'm looking at, but it's out of there. Um, so all right, so I got to ask then. So we're getting into poetry and whatnot. I got to say book curses and just we got to yeah. See, you giggled when I said it on the thing, so I know that's a thing.
So book curses are absolutely fascinating. I taught a class on it during the lockdowns for the East Kingdom's ANS, and I came about it. There's an entire book that's out of print now that's called Anathema, the Book Curse. And a lot of times, what I do, having been to library school and caring about archives very, very much, is I know how personally you feel about holding on to those things. So book curses were essentially a medieval security system. People would write, so like the monks who were writing these things spent 3 to 4 months writing a gospel. That's a lot of writing. And so they would write some variation of, if you steal this book, God will curse you and you're an anathema to heaven.
Wow.
And they got very, very creative with how they wrote these curses. So some of them would be poetic, some of them would be things, and like I can't remember all of them offhand, but one of my favorites was somebody basically said, like, you'll be cursed like Judas, you'll have your entrails torn out. Like they get very, very graphic. And I mean, again, I think I understand, like, if somebody works for 4 months on something and that might get stolen, you kind of feel it. Um, it, I'm not sure how well it works, because you definitely see instances where it says, like, there's also places where they'll negate it. So they'll be like, if you steal this book, you will go to hell unless you bring it back.
So what got you into, how did you discover that these existed?
I mean, the internet finds some weird stuff once in a while. And there was a whole collection of like book curses. And I went, that is so neat. I need to find out more. And so my husband had been in college at the time and got me that out of print book from the library. So I was able to get a copy to look at. And then I ended up buying myself one because it delighted me so much. You can find a lot of examples through like the British Library has some examples if you know where to look. And so these curses, I mean, were even simple, like into the 17th century, you see them in like cookbooks. Like this is Miss Makepeace's cookbook, don't steal it, or something bad will happen to you. Your hands will fall off, or that kind of thing.
Do have you dabbled into that in your own writing? Like just in like
I
have you
actually
like
did write a book curse when I came across it, but it was inspired by Dr. Seuss. So it's if thou should steal this book of prayer, thou art not welcome, not anywhere, nor God's angels nor hell below shall take thee. Where shall you go? Stay the earth and travel far, for cursed be the thief you are.
Nice.
wow.
That's vicious and I love it.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think when I did it at a Bardic circle, somebody's like, so leave Alienor's books alone.
So the other thing it said is you have two latest things that you're delving in new fixation, um and now I can't find it. Undervalued people. Personal
Mhm.
Mhm.
interests include book curses and undervalued people. Can you explain what you mean by undervalued people?
So at one point, maybe 5 years ago, somebody had told me that LGBTQ wasn't period. And I sometimes find I research out of spite. So I went, oh yeah. And so I've been compiling resource lists on the queer community in period and the different ways that, because it's a big wide swath of place. And so what I'd been doing initially was just getting these resources compiled, because when you're home during lockdown or when you have a small child and can't travel, I need to keep my geek somehow. And so that's where I was getting a lot of that from. But then I was like, I'm not going to just stop here. So I have a resource list on diversity in the Middle Ages, like the ethnic diversity in Europe. I mean, there's definitely a lot that was already going on in the Americas and Africa, but I was interested in all the recent scholarship on like the John Blank, who was a black trumpeter in the court of Henry VII. And I was just fascinated by the research that, I mean, he shows up in with the trumpeter roles. You can see a picture of him. And there's just these incredible scholars who've been finding more and more research out there. And since I'm a librarian and can find that stuff, I just wanted to compile these resources. Well, they've grown into about 7 to 10 pages each. And so my third one is the disability studies in the Middle Ages, because there's some fascinating scholarship that perhaps like even St. Francis of Assisi might have had epilepsy. And if not, there's other forms of disability in the saints or the trans saints. I mean, they wouldn't have called themselves trans, but there were people who had been born one thing and became men because God said so. And I don't think people know that that kind of scholarship's out there. And so my resource list is on through my East Kingdom wiki page. And so I wanted it to be widely available for people. And so my next sort of set of goals is to annotate them and try to start teaching more classes on each topic.
Yeah, but that was going to be my next question. Is like one of the goals to start teaching this and whatnot.
So I have also taught coursework on the secret Jews of the Iberian Peninsula. And that's where I kind of started with some of that interest. But it just grows because the scholarship grows. There's just every 6 months or so, I try to look at the latest scholarship and update it, and there's more and more and more. And it's fantastic because um, people who've been undervalued in history have always been there. And we don't always have the same titles or words. So autism spectrum disorder would not have been there, but plenty of people were doing just fine in their monasteries and their communities where it was quiet and they could be left alone. And that was considered in some places godly, or in some places just somebody living in their community. And so a lot of my interest is just helping people find their modern equivalent in the history as well.
When I was researching a class that I teach on Shakespeare's Fools, I start by talking about fools historically speaking, and one of the things that I found out about were those that were called the innocents,
Hmm.
which is disabled. Usually they get them when they're children and would train them to be sort of like the fool or the totem animal almost,
Hmm.
which is horrible of the courts. Um, but they were always people who had either a physical or mental disability of some kind, but they considered them to be innocent. Not saying they were treated well because they weren't. But there is something you may want to look into is the innocence
I
as you.
have actually taught a class on the pool, and that was one of the ones I looked at for sure. So,
Okay, great minds
um,
think alike then, fine.
but I always want more. Um, but it's hard again when you have a modern life to live. But the point on that is true, and I think there's a lot when it comes to the holy. There's also the holy fools. There are also fools who were allowed to speak truth. I mean, some of the ones who were at the like higher nobility courts were allowed to speak truth because they thought it was funny.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I don't know what I was gonna. Well, I was gonna sort of ask what got you into studying fools.
Well, I was in the Fool and Theater Guild back in Yarravettler, and it sort of became a hey, if we're calling ourselves a fool or jester, what really was that? And I mean, that sort of sent me down some expanded avenues, especially when you consider like the Shakespearean clowns and the way that they went from being an entertainment off, during between breaks and then becoming the on stage. How did that happen and why? And the belovedness of certain kinds of humor. I mean, I think um, one of the things I love about the performing arts is the fact that there's so much interaction with a performer and the individual. And you can get a lot out of a live performance that you can't get from a television. And that's why the Bardic arts are enriching, is because you can connect with someone like, oh, that story meant something to me. I'm going to do this one next. And so the Fool as a humor, because we're talking, times of plague, times of difficulty, times where things could be so hard. And to find humor when things are hard is really important. And so being able, there's actually a story from the Talmud where it says, like, they were asking who had a place in the future world and the world to come. And somebody said, well, the fools, these two fools, what do they do? And they said, well, we make people laugh who are sad, and we take people who might be fighting and make them come together again. And so that has a place in the future world. And I just love that.
Yeah, I like that.
Do you find, and again, this is just a weird train of thought as you started to talk about it. Um, is it hard to reconcile, especially with our SCA life, that like things that we are trying to reenact are really things that could be pretty offensive, especially by today's standards. So, like a group that would call themselves the Fools, not really understanding what the historical connotation is. That do you think that we have? Do you think I guess what I'm saying is, do you think it's the SCA? We should just present things as they are, or try to present things now with more of a modern lens on them?
Well, I think in a lot of ways it's a good point, but in a lot of ways it's a wide range. So there were innocent fools, but there were also artificial fools. So people who were witty and telling humor for a purpose. What I like to do for any kind of Scadian related thing is, this is something that is period. This is something that might be offensive. This is something that doesn't fit our modern goals. We as a modern society have to recognize that we have a wide breadth of interest. And so you can't bring in things that are truly insulting or truly horrible. But I think it's a disservice to not acknowledge that those happen.
Hmm.
Right. Yeah, so like when we were originally doing the nominal players when I wanted to do Canterbury Tales, I dove into, I have my Riverside Chaucer and I dove in and I was like, the second Nun's Tale is so anti-Semitic and
Mm.
horrific. And I was like, should I do it? This was, 20 something 20 years ago or so. And I thought, should I do it to educate people about what they thought that what was acceptable writing for Geoffrey Chaucer's time. And then I got my brain back and was like, absolutely not. This is just horrifically offensive. But in light of that, I think about my whole history lately, all my memories on Facebook about the swastika trim
Yeah, that.
and that whole debacle that came out of Caid. And I think about what they mistakenly think that they were trying to reclaim it or whatever, but didn't understand how horrible it was. And so there's that fine line that we have to walk in the SCA of if I'm going to, I know a really well-known bard who tells saint tales, for
Mm.
example. I know another really well-known bard or two who tell Jewish tales, right? Stories based on the Talmud.
Mhm.
And do they, because we're not allowed to mix religion in the SCA, are they supposed to have warnings before they perform? I'm about to tell you something religious. I mean, it's different in the Bardic circle because we
Mhm.
all pretty much know each other and accept what everybody does. But how would I feel as a, because sometimes I was uncomfortable when I was a pagan and I would go to these circles and hear these religious stories. They
Mhm.
would make me uncomfortable. So where's that line? And how do we ensure that we don't cross it and risk offending somebody?
I mean, one of the things that I've learned just in certain circumstances is that I prefer to at least give a warning. So if my individuals talks or those kinds of things, they'll be like, they use language that would be considered offensive when you're looking for this, but it does a disservice and it is the scholarship from the time. And I think what's really important is to recognize the scholarship versus presenting it as something that people are forced to see versus something where people are invited to come in as a space. So if I'm doing like the secret Jews of the Iberian Peninsula, there's some truly terrible torture and things that happen to individuals. And so I teach it as a class, but not something where I'm going to force everybody to see it.
Mhm.
And I would say in your description, I put, this will be discussing something of a religious nature. And so feel free, just to understand that.
Gotcha.
Hmm. So then, going back to the person who, what was the context? Again, and I don't want to drag this out. What was the context in which the person said to you that LGBTQ was not period?
I don't really remember, to be
Okay,
honest, because it was quite a long time ago, really. But it just, I'd heard people kind of just give me these things of, well, that's not period. And I love a challenge, and it wasn't even really that challenging to find resources on the topic. I mean, the
I
thing
can't
is,
imagine that would be very hard. I mean, I don't know. I like.
well, I mean, I think part of it was the language, right? So if you don't know what language that was being used in a different culture, it's hard to find. I mean, they wouldn't have used a term like transgender, but if you know what to look for, you'll find it. And so a lot of the scholarship now has been looking at that with the modern terminology. So that's where you can find some of it. But it's just what I love about what I find is there's always something new. There's always something fascinating. The Black Europeans are absolutely fascinating. It's just, you can see them in records like just going about their life. And I think it's really great that we have these incredible scholars doing that research and I can read the book.
What's your most fascinating thing that you've discovered? You feel like you discovered?
I'm not sure I've discovered because I've done the
Like,
digging, but I
yeah.
think the way I just feel like I know some of them. I mean, John Blank is a perfect example. I mean, a trumpeter at the court of Henry VII, who probably came over like with they think um Catherine of Aragon's court. So he was probably um but he was free. He got specifically, I think it's just because they find him in the account books. So they account for getting purple cloth for their when the tournament was happening for Henry and Catherine's son, who died at 50 days old. So the young prince, he shows up in the portrait. And I just think like seeing the image of him, just, it's hundreds of years ago. And I feel like I get to sort of meet him in those little accounts. He asked for a raise. He went to the king's, master of ceremonies and asked for a raise and got it. That's pretty cool.
Wow. So we've dived pretty deep into what you research, but we've barely touched. So you are researching the Cagos, I don't know how to say that,
I'll go, yeah.
marginalized community in the Pyrenees in France and Spain.
Mhm.
So who are they? Tell us about them.
So the Kago are absolutely fascinating. A lot of the research, I found them through a historical fiction book, and it just sent me down some interesting rabbit holes because they've disappeared from the record. So essentially in the Pyrenees, nobody really knows who they were. They were a group that were identified by a goosefoot or a duckfoot and had to wear a badge. They had to go in and were segregated from the rest of their community. They had to go into a church separately. They couldn't receive or touch anybody from the rest of the community. They could only marry within their community, and they were very harshly punished if they did even things that most peasants did in the southern part of France, like wear shoes. And nobody knows really why they were disliked so much. So there's a bunch of different, so the scholarship's mostly in Spanish and French, but there's a bunch of different theories basically. So there were theories that they might have been the original pagan community that lived there, and then when other people came in and they still were just disliked. There's a theory that they might have been lepers originally, which might not have been actual leprosy, Hansen's disease, but some kind of skin disorder that the families had and they weren't allowed to touch anybody. There's theories that they might have been Visigoths or different, like the Cathars or believed heresies, or that maybe they had been sort of a disgraced band of carpenters that mostly made execution equipment. Like there's all these theories, but nobody knows. And what's fascinating about them as a community is they've disappeared. So essentially, when they were emancipated and didn't have to be identified by law anymore in France and Spain, they went into the towns and destroyed the records that marked them as Cago and left when they were allowed to. And so there's very few people who even know that they're Cago descendants. And really, they were probably ethnically very much like the communities they lived in. And I just find that fascinating because of the sort of tribalism and attitudes of picking somebody to make your scapegoat. That's a very old cultural thing. And the fact that the Cago were in that position, and that there's some English scholarship about it, but it's not extensive. So you have to be able to read some of the French to get it. And they were called all sorts of things. And so I'm trying, like, there's certain terms in other cultural communities where we know they're insulting terms. So they called themselves chrétiens, just Christians. And so I want to make sure that in the future for my research, I write that as their primary because that's what they called themselves. But they're best known as Cago. They were known as a whole bunch of things from Spain. There's all sorts of cultural touchstones for their names, cagots and different things, but they were all insults. I mean, they were calling them like dog people or things like that. They were just all terrible names. And it was awful. I mean, even if somebody was wealthy, they would do pretty much brutal tortures if they touched something or came in the wrong door. I mean, it was really, and I don't think a lot of people know about that as a culture. People are probably familiar with other kind of marginalized groups, but the fact that this was a group that really probably had no idea themselves why they were set apart and different, but they just were, and they had no choice in the matter.
How long of a period did that last for them? Because you said
Pretty long.
they were emancipated.
It was about 1000 to about the 1700s is when they had to be emancipated. And there's some stories about sort of the last Kago, where one woman was interviewed as somebody who was Kago or who knew her family was, but really they've completely disappeared as a group that calls themselves that or identifies that. And probably most people don't even know, because once you immigrated or left that place, you didn't have to mark yourself as that anymore. Nobody knew that's what you were. So once there was more movement, you could, and it wasn't so insular, you could get away from that.
Do we know why they were emancipated? Like why
It
suddenly
was
there was
part
a
of
change?
like the French Revolution and the kind of attitude of freedom of around the same time other people were freed from repression as a liberty and freedom kind of component.
Huh.
So
You said that they were called lots of different things. Is there anything? Because I love etymology. So, is there anything that, like, insensitively we might still be using that calls back to that, or is that kind of
I don't
there's
know, but
enough
I
of a
mean,
gap?
again, I mean, when you think about how like you call people certain terminology. I mean, the dog people, and it was some of it's really, really bad. I mean, the terminology is basically like excrement people. So, I mean, that's something that nobody would ever want to call.
No.
Um, I don't think a lot of it has fit in at least American knowledge or language. I
Mm.
suspect because the Kago were used in art to some extent, like there's fonts that show Kago in some of the churches that to mark that that's the door they went in, or that they had to stoop further to get in than anyone else to mark their status. So even in church, they weren't equal. Um, so and then the other thing too though is that duck, the goose foot, that device, that badge, where they were forced to wear it just like other marginalized people have been forced to wear some kind of badge.
Does Kago mean anything, or is that a
Dog
family name?
person or
Oh,
excrement person.
okay. So, all right. So, okay. Wow.
Wow, that makes me really uncomfortable.
Seven,
Like,
and but it was the period of like 700 years. When you said
right, right.
1070, I was like, holy Lord, like,
Yeah, and no, but I mean, very few people know about that time frame, which is why I've been so interested. And I'm hoping to teach a class soon on at least some of the knowledge we do have. Some people online have put together some pretty good photos, so I can see like pictures from those churches. It's pretty fascinating, though. I mean, even if it is uncomfortable, I think part of it is uncovering the voices of people who might have been lost is just incredible, and being able to point to some of their story, even if we don't even know. Like I said, there's so many possible theories as to why they were marginalized, but it doesn't seem like any of them were good reasons. It doesn't seem like anybody really knew.
huh,
Hmm.
that's incredible.
Yeah, I'm glad you told us more about them. I think that that's it seems like so often lately we have guests on who have focused on these marginalized groups. So every time we do a show, I'm learning more and more and more. And it's all stuff that makes me uncomfortable, but in a I'm glad I know this way.
Well, it's exciting that that scholarship is being explored in the society in a wider way too.
Go ahead, Lucas. My cat is
Um,
being really weird. Excuse me.
oh, sorry. I actually wanted to go to the bio for a second. Bu- 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 bu-
Sorry, my cat's just been like zooming around the house.
That's okay. My dog is currently sniffing around the whole room. So
So let's transition then to talking about your household, and you had some good news with your Laurel, you said.
yes, my Laurel, so Master Tiberius Julius Rufus Primus, was recently knighted at our Market Day at Burka event, which happens in what's modernly New Hampshire. That's an event that is a shopping event based off of the Burka event in Sweden, the Burka marketplace, and it's huge. There's so much shopping. but my household is kind of scattered around the Eastern region, so I don't get to always see them in one place. And it's what I love about having my Laurel is also just became a knight, and he's also a pelican, and he's a poet and a potter, kind of a Renaissance Roman, really a Renaissance man Roman. But as a mentor, one of the things that I love is that the community of the household siblings are everything from fencing, fighting, service, and arts. And I feel like getting the well-rounded view of the society has helped me a lot. Back in North Shield, I was part of a wonderful performing arts household where everyone was performers. And in this one, I'm one of a few that perform. And what I love is I feel like I get that whole view of the society from my household siblings. And I love that. I feel like somebody explaining to me why their combat archery moment or somebody telling me about their success in fencing, and just getting to see that kind of whole diverse piece of the SCA within the small group is really nice. And they mean a lot to me for that reason.
So how do you guys keep in touch? Like that's the thing as a Laurel with five apprentices, almost six. Some of them have left the SCA but stayed on. Three of them have left the SCA but stayed
Mm-hmm.
on just because they love our family.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you stay in touch? We use Facebook Messenger
Yeah,
mostly.
we do too. We do too. A messenger is kind of a one way, and mostly it's sometimes I share the just random stuff sometimes, like, hey, I got a new job. Hey, this is cool. Things like that. So modern and historical, but that's kind of how we do it.
I was
Um,
wondering if you had a Discord channel, which is I don't
I
think
mean,
my people could handle that.
my Shire has a Discord channel, and I always forget it's there. I
Yes.
My
I'm juggling enough.
a close knit group, kind of the movers and shakers of my barony now, have transitioned from doing the Facebook thing to the Discord, and since then I've like boom, like no contact because I just have no time to like figure it out. And
Every
yeah,
once in a while, I remember it exists. So it's harder though with juggling everything else. I mean, I've got modern commitments and work and experience. So, but that's kind of how we keep in touch, especially just because they're sort of scattered all over the region.
So how did you find him or did how did he find you?
yeah, identify you.
In his lineage, you ask the person, and I'll be like, I had some pretty severe anxiety about asking anyone, but when it comes, he lives in the Shire that I do, and my apprentices, who was one of your guests, Aurelia, basically like she's like, just do it. Just ask. So I was a little tipsy to get up the courage to ask, and I asked at an event, and he agreed. A lot of it was to be able to get poetry and to feel confident in myself. And I think that's been the biggest benefit I have of him as a mentor, and of actually the household helps with that too, is just helping me to build confidence in myself, because I've gained a lot that I did not have before.
So is your husband part of the household or our family's not part of the
I mean,
clan?
he's part of it in that way, but he also has his own household. So I'm kind of part of some extended households as well, just by countering that. He has a pelican from a who's also in our region. He's really focused a lot more on service. Um, while I've been off doing the arts. But I do and desperately believe that service is a backbone of the society. So I try to do service at events, oftentimes like sitting at the ANS table or something like that, when I'm not doing the service of chasing after my 4-year-old.
I remember those days. So how did you and your husband meet? And was he in the SCA already, or did you drag him?
So we met at like the first event when I moved to this region from the Midwest, so to Vermont, was an event that was at someone's home property. It was called Lost Tip, and it was an archery event. And I just figured I don't do archery, but I'll try archery. I like to meet someone. And he was at that event, Um, and the thing about him is he was shy. And so apparently he was saying things on Facebook like, I really like this girl, but I don't know if I should ask her out. And meanwhile, I was telling my family, I really like this guy, but he doesn't seem to know I exist. And so like I went to one of our Shire meetings and I made like a delicious meal like for our potluck and was like, you should try this. And he just completely seemed to miss it. I don't know. He wouldn't look at me. I was just blah. And then he messaged me and said, "Oh, you're the girl I was talking about on Facebook. Would you like to go out with me?" And I was like, "What?" I am so confused. So uh but yeah, he's in the Shire out here, and I feel like the biggest sense of just humor, hilarity of having found him here in the SCA. Um, he, as I mentioned, he does a lot of service. That's like his big thing. He does a lot of web ministry related work, and he's been pretty much every kind of officer you could think of to do when it comes to like a, seneschal, exchequer, and then he loves helping people. So that's been a big part of it. He's wonderful. Obviously, I would think that we have a son. But a lot of what I've gotten from having him in my life is I'm really lucky to have found the SCA that got me down that journey to find him there. Going from Madison, Wisconsin to a small town in Vermont and meeting my husband that way through the SCA.
That's awesome.
Do your interests and his complement each other? Are they the same, or are they completely? Was he more martial? You said it was an archery event, so was he an archer or?
He does. I mean, he doesn't do as much martial like archery as he used to because it's just harder these days. But in service is really his big focus. But he will happily listen to me perform and listen to me go on and on about my latest discovery with fondness, which I think is wonderful in someone because I geek out.
That's why I love you. All right, so we are wrapping up. Unless you have any more questions, Lucas?
I have like 100, but we just don't have. Like, I feel like we need to bring you back because, like, I could go back to your research and talk about that again for a while, but maybe another day. I feel like because
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll
yeah,
have you back on the show, Eleanor. We'll
Okay.
just dive into more research. All right, last question. What can the SCA do better?
One of the biggest things that I've thought for a long time about the SCA doing better is making it more accessible. During COVID lockdowns, we had a lot of opportunities for hybrid. We had more opportunities for people to have, at least feel part of the community, even if their disability or what those kinds of things made it hard to get around. And I feel like we've lost sight of that. Sometimes people feel like their medieval experience should trump the opportunity of like a microphone to help people hear. And I just feel like we need to be more open and accepting and try to remind ourselves that if somebody makes a mistake, you don't need to jump on them. You need to be kind and not scare them off. Because what happens when somebody comes to their first event is how they're going to see the SCA and they might leave. And sometimes people just get so harped up on what's period or what's whatever that they miss the fact that these are our future and we should open them. And I mean, like when I was new, I had some kind of mini faux pas where bare arms. That was her personal, like, she didn't like not having them, but she made me sleeves. So I'd have the sleeves to go under the garb. And I just think like that's a metaphor for what people can do. Instead of like telling people what they're doing wrong, help them to do it better.
Hmm.
Word.
Yeah, wow.
All right. You have been watching Simply Scadian. No title required. Our special guest this week has been Alienor Hathaway. And Lucas and I will be back. I hope, Lucas, we'll be back In 2 weeks, special guest, not sure yet. We'll find somebody. But hey, if you're watching and you haven't been on the show and you're not a peer and not a baron, baroness, either landed or court, we would love to have you on the show. So please reach out to us and let us know if you're interested. I've winnowed down almost everybody on our submissions, so we need more guests. If you want this show to continue, nominate people, please. All right. Thanks, guys.